place in STEM? On the computer? I don't know. I think if you ask most people in engineering what a poet is, I don't think they would get what a poet is.
Well, I find that a really interesting question, because at Georgia Tech we have 2 chairs in poetry. And we have very lively poetry readings, 6-7 times a year. And the people who attend those sessions are students who are engineers. So I think it is, to me, an understanding of the way that expressivity operates in a life, and understanding that there are different levels of expertise about what it means to be a poet. But there's not something foreign about the role of poetry in your life. So you can appreciate words well used. You can appreciate emotions well expressed. You can appreciate experiences well rendered, and know that that is the poetic in us. And some people are really very good at that, and that we want to enjoy them as they are. But we also know that we all have the human capacity to participate in that expressive process. And that the thing about being in the company of poets is helping you to understand those kinds of human connections. You can be an engineer and still like poetry.
You know, you said 2 terms there that we don't usually use. One we always use in engineering, called communications. You got this idea, you got to communicate it over here so everybody gets it. We don't generally say express. Express is, sometimes it's your internal state, it's your idea. You're just expressing it, and that's a process of many different things that we frequently don't focus on. Bracken, you had something to contribute here?
I was going to oversimplify this to an embarrassing degree probably, but when I think of poetry, I think of verbal and visual beauty. It's economical, it's aesthetically attractive, it just appeals to you. And I think that's true of everybody who's studying STEM, and it's true of every human being. And I think, you know, if you're an engineer and you're creating a software program, there's poetry in that if you do it incredibly beautifully well. And so I think that's, to me, poetry, if you simplify it to those terms, to me it works very well in STEM. The poetry of physics, the poetry of engineering.
I think poetry does many things, and there are many different kinds of poetry, and they really do different things. But I think some of the things that poetry can do is invite you to look at a world that is different than the one that you normally look at. And it can be a microcosm, it can be a grand world, and sometimes it challenges you to look at things differently, to try to use the words to, in your own mind, create this picture, this world, this whatever it is that the poet is describing. And that for STEM and engineering to really be as effective as they should be, and in particular for scientists and engineers, I think this ability to see the world through different lenses, to be able to put yourself in the minds of someone else, in the experience of someone else, which is really in many cases what poetry is inviting you to do. And if you don't have that ability, then it limits you as an engineer. And yet, to the extent that poetry can actually be one of the really exquisite ways of improving that ability, it's incredibly valuable.
It's almost like everyone's searching in their own field. How do we get out to all the others? How do we integrate it?
I think there's something very basic about that point. You know, it's about what kind of eye you have, what kind of heart you have, what kind of imagination and mind you have, even what kind of backbone do you have, what are you willing to see in the world. But the question that keeps coming back to me especially with people who are scientists or engineers or computer people or things that are of a technological world in whatever way, is that all that you are? No. I don't believe that about anybody I know, and I know a lot of engineers these days. Is that all that you are? And so
They wouldn't buy a widget unless they looked at 10,000 of them, and they'd marry the first girl through the door. Be like, you need a little help, buddy. I don't know what to say.
So if there is an exposure to poetry in these systematic ways, and the implication is through a curriculum, then does that give a student who is not in the habit of seeing or thinking or feeling or expressing in these alternative ways the opportunity to stretch the mind, the imagination, the viewpoint, the ability to perceive through something that is beyond the typical habit that he or she has.
And I think it can go in the other way as well. I was working with some academics recently, and they kept talking about this paper, and that these people had all these hypotheses, and then it turned out this, and everything. And I'm reading this paper, and I finally said, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to kill a tree. We gotta print out the 39-page paper. I am lost. And I sat down, and on one piece of paper, just like this, on one side, there were like 6 bubbles, and the hypotheses didn't go one to the other. I kind of made this thing, okay, this is asking about this says this, this, okay, and then, in the end of the day, all the science, and then it all stuff, and it's like, and actually only 4 things came out. And I said, okay, here's where we started, and everybody in the whole room said, oh! They've been talking about it for 2 days, and so an engineer can come in with just saying, I just got to put it down on a piece of paper with some arrows and circles that actually isn't there personally, it ends up contributing to the whole. So it's like, I think that if we can find some of these places, I think it's really interesting.
We're talking about symbolic systems. I mean, and the way that poets use language is one symbolic system. The way that mathematicians use numbers and physicists use formula of various kinds, those are other symbolic systems. Why not have the capacity to use more than one system?
Right, multiple languages of many different varieties. Exactly. In 1,000 years, will Steve Jobs still be talked about the way you